I gripped the steering wheel tighter as we turned onto the winding driveway leading to my in-laws' sprawling country house. Chris, my husband of 7 years, reached over and patted my knee. "Relax, honey. It's just dinner with my parents," he said, flashing me that boyish grin that usually melted my heart. Today, it only made my stomach churn. "I know," I replied, forcing a smile. "I just want everything to be perfect." Our 4-year-old son, Ethan, piped up from the back seat. "Grandma and Grandpa have a pool." "Can we swim, Mommy?" "We'll see, sweetie," I said, catching his excited face in the rearview mirror. At least someone was looking forward to this visit. As we pulled up to the house, Chris's parents emerged onto the porch. His mother, Eleanor, waved enthusiastically, while his father, Richard, stood with his arms crossed, a stern expression on his face. "Amy, darling," Eleanor called out as we exited the car. She enveloped me in a perfume-scented hug. "You look comfortable," she added, eyeing my simple sundress with barely concealed disapproval. "Thanks, Eleanor," I said, gritting my teeth. "It's great to see you both." Richard nodded curtly. "Christopher, Amy." His gaze softened as he bent down to greet Ethan. "There's my boy. Come give your grandpa a hug." As we made our way inside, Eleanor linked her arm through mine. "Amy, dear, I hope you don't mind, but I've prepared a special family recipe for dinner. I know how particular you can be about food." I bit back a retort. "I'm sure it'll be delicious," I managed. Dinner was a minefield of thinly veiled criticisms and loaded questions. Eleanor tutted over Ethan's table manners, while Richard grilled Chris about work. "So, Christopher," Richard began, swirling his wine glass, "how's the business doing? Still letting Amy handle the books?" Chris chuckled nervously. "Dad, you know Amy's not involved in the day-to-day operations anymore. She's focusing on raising Ethan." Eleanor jumped in. "Oh, that's right. How noble of you, Amy, to give up your career, though I do worry about Ethan not having the stimulation of daycare or preschool. Have you considered enrolling him?" I took a deep breath. "Actually, Eleanor, we've been doing a lot of educational activities at home. Ethan's reading skills are already quite advanced for his age." "Is that so?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "Well, I suppose time will tell, if that's enough." The conversation mercifully shifted, but the tension remained palpable. As we finished dessert, Chris cleared his throat. "Mom, Dad, there's actually something Amy and I wanted to discuss with you," he said, glancing at me. My heart rate spiked. This wasn't part of the plan. What was he doing? Chris continued, "We've been thinking about the future, and well, we'd love for you both to come stay with us for a while, maybe even permanently." The room fell silent. Eleanor's face lit up like a Christmas tree, while Richard nodded approvingly. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Oh, Christopher," Eleanor exclaimed. "What a wonderful idea! We've been feeling this big old house is too much for us lately, haven't we, Richard?" Richard grunted in agreement. "It would be nice to be closer to our grandson." All eyes turned to me. Chris squeezed my hand under the table, mistaking my shock for excitement. "What do you think, honey?" he asked, beaming. "Wouldn't it be great to have Mom and Dad around to help with Ethan?" I forced the corners of my mouth upward, my mind reeling. "It's certainly something to consider," I managed to choke out. As Eleanor launched into plans for redecorating our guest room, I caught Chris's eye. He mouthed "thank you" with a grateful smile, completely oblivious to the panic rising in my chest. What had he done? And how on earth was I going to get out of this mess? It's been 3 weeks since Chris's parents moved in, and I'm at my wit's end. Every morning, I wake up hoping it was all a bad dream, only to hear Eleanor's shrill voice echoing through the house. "Amy, dear," she calls from the kitchen. "I've made Ethan a proper breakfast. You really should cut back on those sugary cereals." I bite my tongue and force a smile as I enter. "Good morning, Eleanor. That's thoughtful of you." Ethan sits at the table, poking at a plate of rubbery eggs and wheat toast. He looks up at me, pleading silently. Now," Eleanor chides, noticing our exchange. "A growing boy needs protein, not empty carbs." I take a deep breath. "Ethan, sweetie, why don't you go get dressed for school?" As soon as he's out of earshot, I turn to Eleanor. "I appreciate your help, but Ethan and I have a routine that works for us." She waves her hand dismissively. "Oh, Amy, you're still new at this. Trust me, I raised 2 wonderful children. I know what I'm doing." Before I can respond, Chris breezes in, kissing me on the cheek. "Morning, honey. Mom, thanks for breakfast." I watch in disbelief as he shovels down the eggs, oblivious to the tension. As he heads out, I catch his arm. "Chris, can we talk later? About the living situation?" He glances at his watch. "Sure, but I've got a late meeting. How about tomorrow?" I nod, deflated, as he rushes off. Eleanor's voice cuts through my thoughts. "Amy, dear, I noticed you haven't done laundry in a while. Why don't I take care of that for you?" "No," I say too quickly. "I mean, thank you, but I've got it under control." She raises an eyebrow. "If you say so, though I did notice some of Chris's shirts looking a bit wrinkled last week." I clench my fists, counting to 10 in my head. This is my house, my family. I need to stand my ground. But as the days wear on, my resolve weakens. Eleanor rearranges my kitchen, critiquing my organizational skills. Richard monopolizes the TV, grumbling about kids these days whenever Ethan wants to watch cartoons. They've taken over every aspect of our lives, and Chris seems blind to it all. One evening, I'm folding laundry in our bedroom when I overhear them in the hallway. "Christopher," Eleanor says, her voice low, "I'm worried about Amy." She seems overwhelmed. Perhaps she's not cut out for this homemaking business. "Mom, she's doing her best," Chris replies, but his tone lacks conviction. "I'm just saying, dear, you work so hard. You deserve a wife who can keep up. Remember Jessica from high school? I ran into her mother at the store. She's single now, you know." My hands shake as I drop the laundry basket. How dare she? I've given up my career, my independence, to raise our son and support Chris's dreams. And this is how they see me. I storm out of the bedroom, ready to confront them, but they've already moved on. Chris is in his office, door closed, while Eleanor hums in the kitchen, probably criticizing my dinner plans. Defeated, I retreat to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. As I look in the mirror, I barely recognize the woman staring back at me. Where's the confident businesswoman I used to be? The loving wife and mother who felt in control of her life? A soft knock interrupts my spiraling thoughts. "Mommy?" Ethan's voice calls out. "Are you okay?" I open the door, kneeling to hug him tightly. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just a little tired." He looks at me with those innocent eyes. "Grandma says you're not feeling well. She wants to make dinner tonight." Something inside me snaps. "No," I say firmly, standing up. "Tell Grandma that Mommy is making dinner. It's time I took back control of my house." As Ethan scampers off, I square my shoulders. Enough is enough. It's time to have that talk with Chris, whether he's ready or not. This ends now. I thought things couldn't get worse. I was wrong. Just as I'd steeled myself to confront Chris about his parents, he dropped another bombshell. "Honey," he said, cornering me in the kitchen one morning, "I've got some news." I braced myself, clutching my coffee mug like a lifeline. "What is it?" "Lisa's going through a rough patch. She lost her job and can't make rent." He paused, giving me that puppy dog look I used to find endearing. "I told her she could stay with us for a while." The mug slipped from my hands, shattering on the floor. "You did what?" Chris flinched. "It's just temporary, Amy. She's family." "And what about our family?" I snapped, gesturing around our overcrowded home. "Where exactly is she going to sleep? In the bathtub?" "We'll figure it out," he said, already backing away. "She'll be here tomorrow. I've got to run to work. Love you." Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me to clean up the mess. Story of my life lately. The next day, Lisa arrived with 3 suitcases and an attitude. She breezed past me at the door, air kissing my cheek. "Amy, darling, so kind of you to take me in. I'm sure we'll be the best of friends." Her saccharine tone made my teeth ache. I forced a smile. "Of course, Lisa. Mi casa es su casa," she laughed. A high, brittle sound. "Oh, honey, let's not pretend this is your casa anymore." I blinked, stunned by her boldness. But before I could respond, Eleanor swooped in, embracing her daughter. "Lisa, sweetheart, we've missed you so much." As they chattered away, I retreated to the kitchen, my sanctuary. But even that was short-lived. "Amy," Lisa's voice rang out, "where should I put my organic, gluten-free snacks? I noticed your pantry is full of processed foods." I gritted my teeth. "Wherever you'd like, Lisa." The days that followed were a nightmare. Lisa criticized everything from my cooking to my parenting. She'd corner Ethan, filling his head with stories about how much fun his dad had growing up, always with the pointed addition, "before Amy came along." One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone in the guest room, my former home office. "I know, right?" she giggled. "You should see how she runs this place. No wonder Chris works late every night." I wouldn't want to come home to this disaster either. My cheeks burned with humiliation and rage. I stormed into the room, not bothering to knock. Lisa's eyes widened in faux innocence. "Oh, Amy, I didn't see you there." "This ends now," I hissed. "I've had enough of your snide comments and manipulations." She stood, drawing herself up to her full height. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean. I'm just trying to help my little brother and his family." The way she said family made it clear she didn't consider me part of it. "Help?" I laughed bitterly. "You've done nothing but undermine me since you got here. Well, guess what? This is my house, and you're not welcome anymore." Lisa's face hardened. "We'll see about that. Chris would never choose you over his real family." A cough from the doorway made us both turn. Chris stood there, looking bewildered. "What's going on?" Lisa's demeanor changed instantly, tears welling in her eyes. "Oh, Chris, Amy's being so cruel. She wants to throw me out on the street." I gaped at her, then at Chris, waiting for him to see through her act. But his face clouded with disappointment as he looked at me. "Amy, can I talk to you in private?" As he led me away, I caught Lisa's triumphant smirk. In that moment, I realized I was fighting a losing battle. This wasn't just about in-laws anymore. It was war, and I was grossly outnumbered. Chris shut our bedroom door, his expression grave. "Amy, what's gotten into you? That's not the woman I married." I stared at him, a stranger in my husband's skin. "You're right," I said quietly. "It's not." The question was, what was I going to do about it? I needed to get out of the house before I exploded. After another tense breakfast filled with Lisa's backhanded compliments and Eleanor's not-so-subtle criticisms, I grabbed my keys and bolted. "I'm meeting Sarah for coffee," I called out, not waiting for a response. The local cafe was my sanctuary, the one place I could breathe freely. Sarah was already there, her warm smile a balm to my frayed nerves. "Honey, you look like hell," she said, pulling me into a hug. I collapsed into the chair across from her, fighting back tears. "It's worse than I thought, Sarah. Lisa's turned my home into a war zone." Sarah's eyes widened as I recounted the past few weeks, the snide remarks, the constant undermining, Chris's obliviousness to it all. "But that's not even the worst part," I said, lowering my voice. "I overheard Lisa on the phone yesterday spreading rumors about me in town." "What kind of rumors?" Sarah asked, leaning in. I swallowed hard. "She told someone I'm having an affair with my old business partner. That's why I quit to stay home with Ethan." Sarah gasped. "That's ridiculous. Everyone knows how devoted you are to Chris and Ethan." "Apparently not everyone," I said bitterly. "This morning at the grocery store, I got the coldest reception from Susan. You know, from the PTA. She practically ran away when she saw me." "Oh, Amy." Sarah reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You can't let them get away with this. You need to confront Lisa, tell Chris what's really going on." I shook my head, feeling defeated. "I've tried, Sarah." "Chris doesn't see it. He thinks I'm overreacting, that Lisa's just going through a tough time." "And what about you?" Sarah's voice rose slightly. "Aren't you going through a tough time? When does your husband start supporting you instead of everyone else?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. When indeed? I thought back to the ambitious, confident woman I used to be. The woman who built a successful business alongside Chris, who never took anyone's crap. Where had she gone? "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "I feel like I'm losing everything. My home, my reputation, my marriage." Sarah's eyes flashed with determination. "Then it's time to fight back. You're Amy freaking Thompson. You don't roll over for anyone, especially not some manipulative sister-in-law and her enablers." As Sarah's words sank in, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my neighbor, Jen. "Amy, is everything okay at home? I saw Chris leaving with a suitcase this morning. If you need to talk, I'm here." My blood ran cold. Chris leaving? With a suitcase? I showed the text to Sarah, my hands shaking. "That's it," Sarah said, standing up. "We're going back to your house right now. This ends today." In a daze, I followed Sarah to her car. As we drove, my mind raced. Had Chris finally had enough? Was he leaving me? Or was this another one of Lisa's manipulations? We pulled into my driveway, and I saw Chris's car was indeed gone. Taking a deep breath, I marched up to the front door, Sarah right behind me. As I opened the door, I heard laughter from the living room. Lisa's voice rang out, clear and triumphant. "Oh, Mom, you should have seen her face this morning. She has no idea Chris is planning a surprise weekend getaway for just the two of them. By the time she figures it out, it'll be too late. We'll have convinced him she needs help with her issues. I give it a month before he realizes he's better off without her. White-hot rage coursed through me. This was it, the moment everything changed. I stepped into the living room, Sarah at my side, ready for battle. "Is that so, Lisa?" I said, my voice steady and cold. "Why don't you tell me more about these plans you have for my marriage?" The room fell silent, all eyes on me. It was time to reclaim my life, my family, and my dignity, and God help anyone who tried to stand in my way. The confrontation with Lisa left me shaken but determined. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of my old self returning. But as I lay in bed that night, tossing and turning, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover. Chris's surprise getaway turned out to be real, much to Lisa's chagrin. We returned home after a tense weekend, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. I wanted to believe this trip was Chris's attempt to reconnect, but doubt gnawed at me. A few days later, I was tidying up our bedroom when Chris's phone buzzed on the nightstand. I hesitated, my hand hovering over it. I'd never been the type to snoop, but after everything that had happened... Before I could second-guess myself, I picked up the phone. A message from Eleanor flashed across the screen. "Chris, darling, I'm worried about Amy. She seems so unstable lately. Remember, you deserve a wife who can support you properly. Perhaps it's time to consider your options." My hands shook as I scrolled through the conversation. Message after message from Eleanor, all criticizing me, suggesting Chris leave me, even mentioning other women he could date. And Chris's responses? Vague reassurances, but never once defending me or shutting down the conversation. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. All this time I thought Eleanor was the problem. But Chris, he was letting it happen. Encouraging it even. "Amy?" Chris's voice called from downstairs. "Have you seen my phone?" Panic surged through me. I quickly placed the phone back on the nightstand and tried to compose myself. "Up here," I managed to call back, my voice surprisingly steady. Chris appeared in the doorway, smiling that easy smile that used to make my heart flutter. Now, it just made me feel sick. "Thanks, honey," he said, grabbing the phone. "Everything okay? You look a little pale." I forced a smile. "Just tired. Ethan kept me up last night." He nodded, already distracted by something on his phone. "Listen, I've got to run to the office for a bit. Mom said she'd watch Ethan if you want to rest." "No," I said, too quickly. Chris looked up, startled. "I mean, that's okay. I've got him." Chris shrugged. "Suit yourself. See you later." As soon as I heard the front door close, I sank to the floor, my mind reeling. What was I supposed to do now? Confront Chris? But with what evidence? I'd snooped through his private messages, and even if I did confront him, would he believe me over his mother? I thought about leaving, taking Ethan and starting over somewhere new. But the idea of tearing my son away from his father, his home, I couldn't bear it. A soft knock on the door frame made me look up. Ethan stood there, his little face creased with worry. "Mommy, are you crying?" I hastily wiped my eyes, forcing a smile. "No, sweetie, Mommy's just thinking." He patted over, wrapping his arms around me. "Don't be sad, Mommy, I love you." In that moment, holding my son, I knew I couldn't run. I couldn't let Eleanor, Lisa, or even Chris destroy what I'd built. This was my family, my life, and I was going to fight for it. I gently pulled back, looking into Ethan's innocent eyes. "I love you too, baby, so much, and I promise you, things are going to get better." As Ethan snuggled against me, I made a decision. No more passive Amy, no more victim. It was time to take control, to confront Chris and his family head-on. I'd built a successful business from the ground up. I could certainly rebuild my marriage and my dignity. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow, I'd face Chris with the truth. And if he couldn't see it, if he chose his mother's manipulations over our family, well, then I'd know exactly where I stood. One way or another, this ends now. I spent the entire day rehearsing what I'd say to Chris, my stomach in knots. When I heard his car pull into the driveway that evening, I took a deep breath and steeled myself. "Chris," I said as he walked in, "we need to talk." He looked up, surprised by my tone. "Sure, honey. What's up?" I led him to our bedroom, away from prying ears. "I saw the messages on your phone," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "The ones from your mother." Chris's face paled. "Amy, I can explain." "Explain what?" I cut him off. How your mother has been systematically trying to undermine our marriage. How she's been suggesting you leave me. Or maybe you'd like to explain why you never once defended me. He ran a hand through his hair, looking flustered. It's not like that. Mom's just protective. She doesn't mean any harm. I laughed bitterly. Doesn't mean any harm? Chris, she's actively trying to break us up. You're overreacting, he said, his tone patronizing. Mom's just looking out for me, for us. Us? I echoed incredulously. There is no us in her mind, Chris. It's you and them versus me, and you're letting it happen. Chris's expression hardened. Now you're just being paranoid. Mom and Lisa are family. They're here to help. Help? I felt my control slipping. Lisa's been spreading rumors about me all over town. Your mother criticizes everything I do, and you just stand by and watch it all happen. That's not fair, Chris protested. I'm trying to keep the peace. You're not exactly making it easy. His words hit me like a slap. So this is my fault? For what? Not rolling over and letting your family walk all over me? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Chris? I demanded. Because from where I'm standing, you've chosen them over me, over our family. Chris's face flushed with anger. Don't you dare question my commitment to this family. I've done everything for you and Ethan. Everything except stand up for us, I shot back. We stared at each other, the air thick with tension. Finally, Chris spoke, his voice low. Maybe we need some time apart to clear our heads. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Are you leaving me? No, he said quickly. I just think we need space. I'll stay at my parents' old house for a while. I watched in stunned silence as he packed a bag, my world crumbling around me. As he reached the bedroom door, I found my voice. If you walk out that door, Chris, don't expect things to be the same when you come back. He paused, his hand on the doorknob. For a moment, I thought he might turn around, might choose us, but then he opened the door and walked out without another word. I sank to the floor, tears streaming down my face. How had it come to this? How had I let things get so out of control? A soft knock on the door made me look up. Eleanor stood there, a look of faux concern on her face. Oh, Amy dear, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I couldn't help but overhear. I'm so sorry things have come to this, but don't worry, we'll take good care of Chris. I stared at her, rage building inside me. This woman, who had systematically torn apart my life, now stood in my home, gloating over her victory. Something inside me snapped. I stood up, wiping away my tears. Get out, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Eleanor blinked, taken aback. Excuse me? I said, get out, I shouted, advancing towards her. Get out of my house, get out of my life. You've taken everything from me. Are you happy now? Eleanor backed away, her eyes wide with shock. Now, Amy, let's not be hasty. Hasty? I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. I've been patient for far too long. No more. You, Lisa, all of you, you're done controlling my life. This ends now. As I stood there, facing down the woman who had orchestrated my misery, I realized this was it. The moment I'd been building towards. It was time to fight back, to reclaim my life and my family, and God help anyone who tried to stand in my way. The house felt eerily quiet without Chris. Eleanor and Lisa had retreated to their rooms, no doubt plotting their next move. I sat on the bathroom floor, staring at the pregnancy test in my trembling hands. 2 pink lines, positive. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. Of all the times to find out I was pregnant, it had to be now, when my marriage was falling apart and my home had become a battleground. I couldn't tell Chris. Not yet. Not when he'd chosen his family over ours. The thought of bringing another child into this toxic environment made me physically ill. My phone buzzed. Sarah. Hey, how'd it go with Chris? Her text read. I couldn't bear to type out the truth. Can you come over? I replied instead. 20 minutes later, Sarah was at my door, concern etched on her face. Amy, what happened? I broke down, sobbing into her shoulder as I recounted everything. The confrontation with Chris, his decision to leave, and now, the pregnancy. Sarah listened, her expression growing more horrified with each revelation. When I finished, she gripped my shoulders firmly. Amy, enough is enough. You need to fight back. I shook my head, feeling defeated. How? Chris won't listen. His family has him wrapped around their finger. Then make him listen, Sarah insisted. You were a badass businesswoman, remember? Where's that Amy? The one who never took crap from anyone? Her words stirred something in me. A spark of the old Amy, the one who faced challenges head-on. "But what if?" I started. Sarah cut me off. "No more what ifs. You're fighting for your family now, both the one you have and the one growing inside you." She was right. I couldn't keep playing the victim. It was time to reclaim my life, my marriage, my dignity. "Okay," I said, straightening up. "What's the plan?" We spent the next hour strategizing. By the time Sarah left, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was done being pushed around. The next morning, I woke up early, determination coursing through my veins. I marched into the kitchen where Eleanor and Lisa were having coffee. "We need to talk," I announced, my voice steady. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Oh? About what, dear?" "About how you're going to pack your bags and leave my house, today." Lisa choked on her coffee. "Excuse me, you can't kick us out." "Watch me," I retorted. "This is my home, and you're no longer welcome here." Eleanor's face darkened. "Does Christopher know about this? He won't stand for it." "Chris doesn't make decisions for me," I said, surprised by my own confidence, "and he certainly doesn't get to choose between his family and ours, because we are his family, me and Ethan." "And the baby," I added, watching their faces pale with shock. "You're pregnant?" Lisa sputtered. I nodded, placing a protective hand over my stomach. "Yes, and I won't have my child grow up in this toxic environment you've created." Eleanor stood up, her voice sickly sweet. "Now, Amy, let's not be hasty. We're all family here. Surely we can work this out." "No," I said firmly. "We can't. You've manipulated and undermined me for the last time. I want you gone by noon." As I turned to leave, Lisa called out, "You'll regret this, Amy. Chris will never forgive you." I paused at the door, looking back at them. "Maybe, but I'll never forgive myself if I don't stand up for my family." With that, I walked out, my heart pounding. I knew the real battle was yet to come. Confronting Chris, making him see the truth, fighting for our marriage, it would be the hardest thing I've ever done. But as I placed a hand on my stomach, feeling the promise of new life, I knew it was worth fighting for. No matter what happened next, I was ready. The old Amy was back, and she wasn't backing down. I stood in our living room, surrounded by packed suitcases and cardboard boxes. Eleanor and Lisa had left hours ago, their faces a mix of shock and fury. Now, I waited for Chris, my heart pounding with each passing minute. The front door opened, and Chris walked in, his eyes widening at the scene before him. "Amy, what's going on?" he asked, confusion etched on his face. I took a deep breath. "I've asked your mother and Lisa to leave. For good." Chris's expression hardened. "You did what? You had no right?" "I had every right," I cut him off, my voice steady. "This is my home too, Chris, and I won't let them destroy our family anymore." "Destroy our family?" he scoffed. "They're trying to help us," I laughed bitterly. "Help us? By undermining me at every turn? By spreading rumors about me in town? By suggesting you leave me?" Chris paled. "How did you?" "I saw the messages, Chris, from your mother, and you never once defended me." He ran a hand through his hair, looking lost. "Amy, you don't understand. They're family. And what are we?" I demanded, gesturing between us. "What about our family? Me, Ethan, and—" I hesitated, then placed a hand on my stomach. Chris's eyes widened in realization. "You're pregnant?" he whispered. I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. "Yes, and I refuse to bring another child into this toxic environment. It's time to choose, Chris, your parents and Lisa, or us." Chris looked torn, his loyalty to his family warring with his love for us. "I can't just cut them off, Amy. There has to be another way." "There isn't," I said firmly. "Not anymore. They've gone too far, and you've let them. I won't be a doormat in my own home anymore." "So what, it's an ultimatum?" Chris's voice rose. "Them or you?" "No," I replied, my resolve strengthening. "It's a choice. The family you were born into, or the family you chose to create. The family that's growing right now." Chris fell silent, the weight of the decision heavy in the air between us. "I love you, Chris," I said softly. "But I love myself too. And our children deserve better than this. So if you can't see that, if you can't stand up for us, then maybe we don't have a future together after all." I watched the emotions play across Chris's face, anger, confusion, fear, and finally understanding. He looked at me, really looked at me, for what felt like the first time in months. "Amy," he said, his voice cracking, "I'm so sorry. I've been blind to what's been happening. I never meant to hurt you." "I know," I replied, feeling a glimmer of hope. "But intentions aren't enough anymore. We need action." Chris nodded, determination replacing the confusion in his eyes. You're right. We're a team, you and me. We built a business together, and now we're building a family. That has to come first. He pulled out his phone, dialing a number. Mom? It's Chris. We need to talk. Things are going to change. As I listened to Chris finally standing up to his mother, setting clear boundaries and defending our family, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wouldn't be easy, and we had a long road ahead of us, but for the first time in months, I felt hope. Later that night, as we lay in bed, Chris's hand resting protectively on my stomach, I realized something. The old Amy hadn't just come back, she'd evolved. I was stronger now, more resilient. I'd fought for my family, for my dignity, and for my future. I love you, Chris murmured, pulling me closer. You, me, Ethan, and this little one, we're in this together. I smiled, feeling truly at peace for the first time in ages. Together, I agreed. As I drifted off to sleep, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them as a united front. No more manipulation, no more doubt, just us, our little family, standing strong against whatever life threw our way. The battle was over, and we'd won. Not just against Chris's family, but against the doubts and insecurities that had plagued us. We'd emerged stronger, more united, and ready to write the next chapter of our lives. Together. I sat in the dim light of the study, my fingers trembling as they clutched the DVD. The label read, The Birth of Nathan, April 17th, 2023. It felt like an eternity since I had stumbled upon it, each moment stretching endlessly as I grappled with its implications. The conversation with Richard earlier that day echoed in my mind, his words cutting deep. Infertility treatment? Why bother with that? Just focus on your duties around here, he had dismissed. It was then I felt reduced to nothing more than a mere convenience in his life. As I heard the front door open, signaling Richard's return, panic and resolve warred within me. I quickly concealed the DVD under a stack of papers and braced myself. My heart pounded against my ribcage, but I couldn't let fear win. Richard, we need to talk, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He gave me a cursory glance, annoyance etched on his face. What now, Emily? More complaints about feeling lonely or neglected. Taking a deep breath, I confronted him. It's about us, about our family. I found something today, Richard. A DVD. I watched his demeanor shift, a fleeting look of fear replacing his annoyance. What DVD? What are you talking about? The Birth of Nathan, I said, allowing the name to linger between us. Who is Nathan, Richard? And who is Laura? His facade crumbled. Panic flickered in his eyes as he looked for an escape. It's not what you think, Emily. You're jumping to conclusions. Am I? My voice rose, a mix of anger and hurt. I watched it, Richard. I saw you there with her during the birth. You were there for her in a way you've never been for me. His silence was a deafening confirmation. My world, once so stable, was crumbling. The man I had devoted my life to was a stranger, his betrayal exposed in the cruelest of ways. The doorbell's chime broke through the tense silence. I answered it to find a man, probably in his late 20s, looking back at me with an anxious expression. Hello, can I help you? My voice was barely a whisper. The man hesitated. I'm Daniel. Is Richard here? I need to speak to him about Laura. It's urgent. A cold shiver ran down my spine at the mention of Laura's name. This was no coincidence. Please come in, I said, moving aside. I think we have a lot to discuss, Daniel. As we sat in the living room, the puzzle began to assemble itself. Daniel, Laura's ex-boyfriend, believed he might be Nathan's father, a child Richard claimed as his own. My marriage, it seemed, was built on lies and deceit. I need your help, Daniel's voice was laced with desperation. I have to know the truth about Nathan. I looked at him, feeling a newfound resolve. You'll have it. We both will. As Richard entered the room, unaware of the impending storm, one thing became crystal clear to me. My life was about to change forever. I never imagined that my life would become a twisted tale of deceit. As I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, my mind replayed the years spent with Richard. Our marriage, once a source of joy, now felt like a beautifully wrapped lie. I remembered our wedding day, the promise of a future filled with love and shared dreams. Richard had seemed like the perfect match, a successful businessman with a charming demeanor. But soon, the fairy tale began to unravel. Our attempts to start a family became a silent battleground. Every month brought disappointment, and with it Richard's indifference grew. I became a shadow in my own home, my presence only acknowledged when chores or errands demanded attention. The memory of my last attempt to address our childlessness resurfaced. "Richard, it's been 3 years. Maybe we should see a doctor, consider fertility treatment?" His response was a cold dismissal. "We don't need that. Just focus on your duties here." His words stung like a slap. It wasn't just about a child. It was about being partners, supporting each other. But to Richard, I was just a fixture in his pristine house, a part of the background. My thoughts were interrupted by the chime of my phone. A message from Daniel. "Can we meet tomorrow? I have something to show you." Curiosity and a sense of solidarity with Daniel compelled me to agree. The next morning, over coffee in a quiet cafe, Daniel shared his story. He and Laura had been in a serious relationship before Richard swept her off her feet. Daniel's face twisted in pain as he recounted how he had lost Laura to Richard's allure and wealth. "But I can't believe Nathan is Richard's son," Daniel said, his voice firm. "I've seen pictures of Nathan, and there's a resemblance to me at that age." His words sparked a fire within me. Richard's betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. He didn't just cheat, he stole a child's identity, a father's right. Daniel slid an envelope across the table. "I've hired a private investigator. We'll get to the bottom of this." I felt a mix of fear and determination as I took the envelope. It was time to face the ugly truth head on. And if Richard was indeed the liar and cheat he appeared to be, he would have to answer for it. Not just to me, but to everyone he had deceived. I returned home with a clear mission. I would no longer be the silent, dutiful wife. Richard's facade would crumble, and his true, repulsive nature would be exposed. And I would be the one to light the fuse. As I sat across from Richard at dinner, the silence was suffocating. Each clink of cutlery sounded like a thunderclap in the tense air. I could barely swallow my food, my thoughts consumed by the plan forming in my mind. "Richard," I finally broke the silence, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "We need to talk about our future." He looked up, his eyes void of the warmth they once held. "What about it, Emily? Planning more vacations to fill your empty days?" The disdain in his voice was a sharp reminder of how far we drifted apart. "No, Richard, it's about us, about our family." I pressed on, feeling a strange mix of fear and empowerment. He scoffed, pushing his plate away. "What family, Emily? We don't have kids, remember? Or is this about that ridiculous DVD again?" I felt my resolve harden. "Yes, it's about the DVD, Richard. It's about Nathan, and it's about Laura." My heart pounded in my chest, but I was determined to confront him. For a moment, Richard seemed taken aback, his facade cracking. Then he regained his composure and sneered. "What do you want, Emily? An apology? An explanation? Or perhaps a share of my wealth?" His words were like venom, each syllable dripping with contempt. I stared at him, aghast at the man he'd become, or perhaps the man he'd always been. "You know what, Richard? I want the truth," I said, my voice rising. "I want to know why you brought that woman into our lives, why you lied to me, to everyone." Richard leaned back in his chair, a cold smile playing on his lips. "You want the truth, Emily? Fine. I was bored. You were always so busy playing the perfect housewife, so obsessed with having a child. Laura was different. Exciting." His confession struck me like a physical blow. He had betrayed our vows, our life together, for a mere diversion. I felt a surge of anger, hot and unyielding. "And Nathan?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. Richard shrugged, his indifference a stark contrast to my turmoil. A convenient lie. Laura needed a father for her child, and I needed entertainment. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You're despicable, Richard. You used a child, a woman, to satisfy your selfish needs, and you used me, your wife." Richard stood too, his eyes gleaming with malice. "And what will you do about it, Emily? Divorce me? Go ahead. You'll be left with nothing." His threat hung in the air, but it no longer frightened me. I had nothing left to lose. "I'll do more than just leave you, Richard," I said, my voice cold and resolute. "I'll expose you for the fraud you are. Everyone will know the truth about Richard the Great." As I stormed out of the room, leaving Richard in stunned silence, I knew there was no turning back. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight. I met with Daniel early the next morning, the winter sun casting a pale light over the city. He greeted me with a solemn nod, his eyes reflecting a shared determination. "We need to expose Richard, Emily. Daniel said as we found a quiet corner in the bustling cafe. I have information from the private investigator. It's not pretty. I braced myself, knowing that whatever Daniel had to say would only fuel the fire of my resolve. Tell me everything, I urged, my voice firm. Daniel slid a folder across the table to me. Inside were photographs, bank statements, and a timeline of Richard's deceit. It was all there in black and white. The affair with Laura, the secret payments, the lies he had woven so skillfully. It's worse than we thought, Daniel said gravely. Richard has been supporting Laura financially. He's been paying for her apartment, her living expenses, everything. I felt a cold fury settle in my chest. Richard had not only cheated on me, but had also used our resources to sustain his illicit affair. And Nathan? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel hesitated, then spoke. Nathan is most likely your child, Emily. Laura was already pregnant when she met Richard. He knew it and still played the doting father to the world. The revelation hit me like a tidal wave. Richard's betrayal was more profound than I could have ever imagined. He had stolen the identity of a child, my child, for his twisted game. We have to bring this to light, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. We'll expose him at the family gathering. It's in 2 weeks. Everyone will be there. Daniel nodded in agreement. I'll be there too. We'll confront him together. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and restless nights. I felt like a shadow in my own home, avoiding Richard's gaze, ignoring his attempts at conversation. My heart was set on one thing only: revenge. The day of the gathering arrived, a cold and clear winter day. The family home was filled with laughter and chatter, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. As the evening wore on, I found my moment. I stood, my hands trembling slightly, and addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I have something to show you. Something that will change the way you see Richard. All eyes turned to me, including Richard's, which held a flicker of fear for the first time. I played the DVD, the images of Laura giving birth, Richard by her side, filling the screen. The room fell into stunned silence. This is not just any woman, I said, my voice steady. This is Laura, Richard's mistress. And the child? He's mine. Richard has been living a lie. The gasps and murmurs filled the room. Richard stood up, his face contorted with rage. Emily, what is this madness? He spat out. You're embarrassing yourself and our family. But I stood my ground. No, Richard, the only embarrassment here is you. Your lies, your deceit, it all ends tonight. Daniel stepped forward, his presence a silent support. She's telling the truth. I've seen the evidence. Richard has been funding Laura's life with his affair. Richard's face was a mask of fury and fear. You'll pay for this, Emily. Both of you. But it was too late. The truth was out, and Richard's world was crumbling around him. As the family erupted into chaos, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had done it. I had exposed Richard for the fraud he was, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my life. The family gathering had turned into a battlefield, and I stood at its center, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and triumph. Richard's mask of composure had slipped, revealing the man he truly was. You've gone too far, Emily, Richard hissed, his face twisted in anger. You're trying to ruin me with lies. His denial only fueled my resolve. Lies? You call this a lie? I gestured to the screen, still displaying the image of him with Laura. The truth is right there for everyone to see. Murmurs rippled through the room. Relatives exchanged shocked glances, their expressions ranging from disbelief to disgust. Richard's mother, a kind woman who had always treated me like a daughter, her voice trembled with emotion. Richard, how could you do this? To Emily, to our family? Richard's gaze darted around the room, seeking an ally, finding none. Mother, it's not what it looks like. Emily is manipulating everything. But his words fell on deaf ears. The evidence was overwhelming. The family's disappointment and anger were palpable. Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady. There's more. Richard has been financially supporting Laura and her child, using family funds. He's been living a double life. The revelation sent another shockwave through the room. Richard's father, a stern man of few words, rose from his seat. Is this true, Richard? Have you been stealing from your own family? Richard's composure crumbled. It's not stealing. I earned that money. I can do what I want with it. His selfishness was on full display, and the family recoiled from him as if he were a stranger. You're no son of mine, his father declared. his voice echoing with finality. I felt a strange sense of detachment as I watched Richard's world fall apart. He had built his life on lies and deceit, and now he was paying the price. "Emily, I'm sorry," Richard said, turning to me with desperation in his eyes. "I never meant for it to go this far. Please, let's talk about this." But it was too late for apologies. "There's nothing to discuss, Richard. I want a divorce, and I want you out of my life for good." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Richard looked around, his expression one of disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend how quickly his life had unraveled. As I left the room, followed by a stunned silence, I knew that this was just the beginning. Richard would face the consequences of his actions, and I would start a new chapter of my life, free from his lies. The days following the family gathering were a whirlwind. News of Richard's deceit spread like wildfire, tarnishing his once respected name. I watched from a distance as the empire he built on lies crumbled around him. Richard attempted to reach out, his messages oscillating between pleading and anger. "Emily, we can fix this. Don't throw away what we have over one mistake," one message read. The next would be filled with accusations. "You've ruined me. How could you be so heartless?" But I remained resolute. His words no longer held power over me. I was done being a pawn in his twisted game. As the divorce proceedings began, Richard's true nature became even more apparent. He fought tooth and nail for every penny, his greed overshadowing any remnants of the man I once loved. "I won't let you leave me with nothing," he spat during one of our meetings. "You think you can destroy me and walk away? I'll make sure you regret this." But his threats were empty, his power waning. The evidence of his infidelity and misuse of funds had left him with little legal ground to stand on. The final blow came when his parents, once his staunchest supporters, turned their backs on him. "We can't condone what you've done, Richard. You're no longer welcome in this family," his father declared, the disappointment in his voice cutting through the tense air of the courtroom. As I walked out of the courthouse, the final divorce papers in hand, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was free from Richard, free from the web of lies that had ensnared me for so long. But my victory was bittersweet. I had loved Richard once, and watching him fall so far was not a cause for celebration. It was a sad, albeit necessary, end to a chapter of my life. As I started anew, I found strength in my newfound independence. I had faced Richard and his deceit head-on and emerged stronger. It was a testament to my resilience, a promise of a brighter future, free from the shadows of the past. The day I signed the divorce papers, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also a sense of loss for what might have been. Richard, once a man I loved, had become a stranger defined by his greed and deceit. I started rebuilding my life piece by piece. The process wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of the past years seemed too much to bear. But with each passing day, I grew stronger, more confident in my newfound independence. One afternoon, several months after the divorce, I found myself at a small, quaint cafe. The place was a stark contrast to the lavish lifestyle I had once known with Richard. It was here, amidst the simple, unpretentious surroundings, that I finally felt at peace. As I sipped my coffee, lost in thought, a familiar face caught my attention. Daniel walked in, looking around before his eyes met mine. He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Emily, it's good to see you," he said, taking the seat opposite me. "Daniel, how have you been?" I asked, returning his smile. "Well, I've been busy, working on a new project, keeping myself occupied," he replied. "And you? How are you holding up?" I took a moment before answering, reflecting on the journey I had been through. "I'm doing well, actually. It's been a time of self-discovery, of healing." We talked for hours, our conversation flowing easily. Daniel shared his dreams for the future, his passion for his work. I found myself opening up about my aspirations, my hopes for a new chapter in my life. As the cafe began to empty, Daniel reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "Emily, I've seen the strength and courage you've shown. You've inspired me in more ways than you can imagine." His words warmed my heart, and I felt a connection with him, a bond forged through shared adversity. "Daniel, I started, but words failed me." He squeezed my hand gently. "I know, Emily, and I'm here whenever you're ready to start again, to start something new, together." I looked into his eyes, seeing the kindness and understanding that had been absent in my life for so long. In that moment, I realized that while one chapter had closed, another was waiting to be written. "Thank you, Daniel," I whispered, a sense of hope blossoming within me. "I think I'm ready to start that new chapter now." As we left the cafe together, I felt a lightness in my step, a sense of optimism about the future. Life had thrown me into the depths of despair, but I had emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead.